Leviticus, chapter 11. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and said to them, Speak to the sons of Israel and say, Of all the beasts on the earth, these are the animals you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a cloven hoof, divided into two parts, and that is a ruminant. The following, which either chew the cud or have a cloven hoof, are the ones that you may not eat. The camel must be held unclean, because though it is a ruminant, it has not a cloven hoof. The hyrax must be held unclean, because though it is a ruminant, it has not a cloven hoof. The hare must be held unclean, because though it is a ruminant, it has not a cloven hoof. The pig must be held unclean, because though it has a cloven hoof, divided into two parts, it is not ruminant. You must not eat the meat of such animals, nor touch their dead bodies. You must hold them unclean. Of all that lives in water, these you may eat. Anything that has fins and scales, and lives in the water, whether in sea or river, you may eat. But anything in sea or river that has not fins or scales, of all the small water creatures and all the living things found there, must be held detestable. You must hold them detestable. You are not to eat their flesh, and you must avoid their carcasses. Anything that lives in water, but has no fins or scales, is to be held detestable. Among the birds here are those you must hold detestable. They may not be eaten. They are detestable. The tawny vulture, the griffon, the osprey, the kite, the several kinds of buzzard, all kinds of raven, the ostrich, the screech owl, the seagull, the several kinds of hawk, horned owl, night owl, cormorant, barn owl, ibis, pelican, white vulture, stork, the several kinds of heron, hoopoe and bat. All winged insects that move on 4 feet you must hold detestable. Of all these winged insects you may eat only the following: those that have legs above their feet so that they can leap over the ground. These are the ones you may eat: the several kinds of migratory locust, solham, hargol and hagab locust in their several kinds. But all winged insects on 4 feet you are to hold detestable. By these you will be made unclean. Anyone who touches the carcass of one will be unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash his clothing and will be unclean until evening. Animals that have hoofs, but not cloven, and that are not ruminant, you are to hold unclean. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. Those 4-footed animals which walk on the flat of their foot must be held unclean. Anyone who touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. And anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash his clothing and will be unclean until evening. You are to hold them unclean. These are the small beasts crawling on the ground that you are to hold unclean: the mole, the rat, the several kinds of lizard, gecko, koa, litar, chameleon and tinshemeth. Of all the small beasts, these are the creatures that you are to hold unclean. Anyone who touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. Any object on which one of these creatures falls when it is dead becomes unclean: wooden utensil, clothing, skin, sackcloth, any utensil at all. It must be dipped in water and will remain unclean until evening. Then it will be clean. If the creature falls into an earthenware vessel, the vessel must be broken. Whatever the vessel contains is unclean. Any food that is eaten will be unclean, even if it is steeped in water. Any liquid that is drunk will be unclean, no matter what its container. Anything on which a carcass of such a creature may fall will be unclean. Oven or stove must be destroyed. For unclean they are, and unclean they must be for you. Although springs, wells and stretches of water will remain clean. Anyone who touches a carcass of theirs will be unclean. If one of their carcasses falls on any seed whatever, the seed will remain clean. But if the seed has been wet, and a carcass of theirs falls on it, then you must hold it unclean. If one of the animals that you use as food dies, then anyone who touches the carcass will be unclean until evening. Anyone who eats the dead meat must wash his clothing and will remain unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up the carcass must wash his clothing and will remain unclean until evening. Any small beast that crawls on the ground is detestable. You must not eat it. Anything that moves on its belly, anything that moves on 4 legs or more, in short, all the small beasts that crawl on the ground, you must not eat these because they are detestable. Do not make yourself detestable with all these crawling beasts. Do not defile yourself with them. Do not be defiled by them. For it is I, the Lord, who am your God. You have been sanctified and have become holy because I am holy. Do not defile yourself with all these beasts that crawl on the ground. Yes, it is I, the Lord, who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. You therefore must be holy because I am holy. Such is the law concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in water and every creature that crawls on the ground. Its purpose is to separate the clean from the unclean, creatures that may be eaten from those that must not be eaten.